Before we begin this chilling tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories and mysterious discoveries. Now, let's delve into the unsettling past. The relentless summer heat pressed down on Oakhaven, a town usually lulled into a somnolent rhythm by its proximity to the meandering Willow Creek. But today, the hum of cicadas was brutally interrupted by the rhythmic clanking and grunting from the municipal sewage treatment plant on the outskirts. For years, the dilapidated facility had been a forgotten relic, slated for demolition and replacement. Now, the heavy machinery of Apex Demolition Incorporated churned through decades of accumulated sludge and concrete, finally reaching the ancient, disused primary settling pit, a structure so old, many residents barely remembered its original purpose. It was mid-afternoon when Miguel, a young, earnest excavator operator, felt a peculiar jolt ripple through the controls of his Cat D6. He paused, frowning. It wasn't the usual grind of concrete or the slosh of hardened waste. This felt different, a sickeningly soft resistance, followed by a crunch that made his teeth ache. He lowered the bucket carefully, his breath hitched in his throat. What emerged, tangled in the reeking, solidified muck, was not another discarded pipe or a chunk of forgotten masonry. It was a human femur. The sight sent a jolt of icy fear through him, instantly cutting through the oppressive heat. He clambered out of the cab, his boots sinking slightly into the viscous ground, his eyes wide with disbelief. A few feet away, lying half-submerged, were other fragments, a tibia, a fibula, and what looked like parts of a pelvis. The bone was discolored, stained a murky brown-black by its long interment, but unmistakably human. Boss, you need to see this." Miguel's voice, usually boisterous, was now a strained whisper that barely carried over the idling machinery. Frank Miller, the site supervisor, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and years of hard labor, sauntered over, wiping sweat from his brow with a greasy rag. "What is it, Miguel? Another damn gas line you almost hit?" he grumbled, his tone laced with exasperation. But his words died in his throat as his gaze landed on the gruesome discovery. The rag slipped from his hand, falling unheeded to the ground. His weathered face paled, the usual ruddy hue draining away. "Holy Mother of God!" he breathed, his voice barely audible. The scene quickly devolved into a maelstrom of activity. Miguel was ordered to shut down his machine. Other workers, drawn by the sudden cessation of work and Frank's rigid stance, slowly gathered, their curiosity turning to horror as they understood the gravity of the situation. Whispers, tinged with a morbid fascination, spread like wildfire. Bones? Human bones. Frank, regaining some semblance of composure, barked orders into his two-way radio. "Get the police, and tell them it's urgent. We found a body. Or what's left of one." Within the hour, the sewage plant transformed from an industrial wasteland into a crime scene. Blue and white tape fluttered in the breeze, encircling the perimeter. Police cruisers, their lights silently flashing, lined the dirt track leading to the facility. Detectives, their faces grim, conferred with uniformed officers. Forensic specialists, clad in white suits, moved with a practiced, methodical grace, their every movement deliberate, respectful of the macabre tableau before them. Detective Inspector Eleanor Vance, a woman in her late 40s with keen, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, took charge. She surveyed the scene with a professional detachment that belied the unsettling nature of the discovery. The reek of sewage, thick and cloying, was almost overwhelming, but Vance had smelled worse. Her gaze lingered on the exposed bones, partially embedded in the viscous sludge, glinting dully under the harsh afternoon sun. "How long have these been here, Doctor?" Vance asked, turning to Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead forensic anthropologist, a man whose passion for his grim work was matched only by his meticulousness. Thorne, with his salt and pepper hair and perpetually serious expression, was already making preliminary observations. Thorne, carefully extracting a smaller bone fragment with specialized tools, didn't look up immediately. "Difficult to say precisely without lab analysis, Inspector," But judging by the degradation, the staining from the wastewater, and the general appearance, I'd estimate at least 5 years. Possibly more. The anaerobic environment of the pit would have slowed decomposition significantly, but also contributed to the discoloration. 5 years. The thought hung heavy in the air. 5 years of someone's absence, 5 years of questions, 5 years of the unknown. And now, the pit, a silent tomb for so long, had finally surrendered its gruesome secret. Vance knelt, carefully avoiding contact with the sludge, examining the pit itself. It was vast, a circular concrete depression, perhaps 20 feet deep, its walls crusted with layers of dried and semi-liquid waste. Any indications of how the body ended up here? Thorne straightened, wiping his gloved hands on a sterile cloth. No obvious signs of trauma on the exposed bones yet, Inspector. But it's too early to rule anything out. The pit itself. It's not a place someone would just fall into accidentally, at least not without a struggle or some very unusual circumstances. The access points are usually secured, especially for a disused pit. Meaning, Vance finished, her voice flat, someone put them here, deliberately. The implication hung heavy, chilling them despite the heat. This wasn't an accidental death. This was a disposal. A deliberate attempt to hide a body, to erase a life. As the forensic team continued their painstaking work, carefully sifting through the putrid muck, the initial findings began to paint a fragmented picture. The remains appeared to belong to a single individual, likely an adult. No clothing fragments were immediately visible, suggesting either extreme degradation or that the body had been unclothed when it entered the pit. The lack of scattered remains indicated that the body had not been dismembered before being deposited. It was a single, grim package. Word of the discovery quickly spread through Oakhaven, carried on the invisible currents of local gossip. The news ignited a firestorm of speculation, fear, and a morbid curiosity that transcended the usual small-town chatter. Who was it? And why here? The sewage pit, a place of silent, forgotten filth, suddenly became the epicenter of a chilling mystery, dredging up not just bones, but also long-buried secrets and anxieties from the town's quiet past. The clock had started ticking, not just on the investigation, but on the delicate balance of Oakhaven's carefully maintained tranquility. The discovery at the Oakhaven sewage plant sent shockwaves through the community, immediately conjuring old ghosts and stirring up anxieties that had long been dormant. Detective Inspector Eleanor Vance and Dr. Eris Thorne established a makeshift command center in an unused office at the local police station, its sterile walls now dominated by grim photographs of the excavation site and large-scale maps of the town. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and the quiet hum of intense concentration. Preliminary analysis confirms the remains are human, adult, and consistent with having been in the pit for at least 5 years, possibly up to 8. Dr. Thorne reported, his voice devoid of emotion as he presented his findings to Vance. He clicked to the next slide on the projector, displaying a detailed image of a cranial fragment. We've identified the skull as belonging to a male, estimated age between 25 and 40 at the time of death. Racial origin is difficult to determine definitively from the bones alone, but there are some indicators suggesting a Caucasian or mixed-race individual. Vance nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen. Any signs of trauma that would indicate cause of death? Thorne shook his head. Not yet, Inspector. The bones are remarkably preserved due to the anoxic environment, but also heavily stained and brittle. We're still carefully cleaning and reassembling. However, we have found something curious. He paused, then clicked to another slide, a close-up of a small, almost imperceptible groove on the sternum. There's a very faint, linear striation here. Could be post-mortem damage from the pit, or it could be a perimortem injury. We need more time to analyze it under a microscope. Keep me updated, Vance said, her mind already racing through the implications. A body, dumped in a sewage pit, intentionally hidden. This was no accident. This was murder, and a murder that had gone undetected for half a decade. The Oakhaven Police Department, usually dealing with petty theft, domestic disputes, and the occasional drunk driving incident, was suddenly plunged into a high-stakes investigation. Officers began poring over cold cases, missing persons reports, and any unsolved disappearances from the past 8 years, both within Oakhaven and the surrounding counties. The list was surprisingly long, a sobering reminder of lives that had simply vanished. One name, however, kept surfacing in the initial checks: Ethan Croft. Ethan, a charismatic but troubled young man, had been reported missing by his estranged parents almost exactly 5 years and 3 months ago. He was 28 at the time, fit and known for his adventurous spirit, but also for getting involved with the wrong crowd. He had a history of minor arrests, bar fights, public intoxication, and a few drug-related offenses. He had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a small apartment, an unpaid phone bill, and a trail of worried but ultimately resigned friends and family. The initial police investigation had concluded he'd likely just skipped town to escape some trouble, a common assumption for individuals with his profile. Vance pulled up Ethan Croft's missing person file. A faded photograph showed a young man with a crooked, easy smile, dark hair falling boyishly across his forehead, and intelligent, if slightly defiant, eyes. She compared the estimated age and general description to Thorne's preliminary findings. The similarities were striking, but far from conclusive. "Ethan Croft," Vance murmured, tapping her pen against the file. "Any connection to the sewage plant?" Detective Sergeant Ben Carter, Vance's diligent and often overly caffeinated second-in-command, had been digging through old records. "Not directly, Inspector. He worked odd jobs, mostly construction and landscaping. But the old sewage plant was decommissioned years before he disappeared. No reason for him to be there. Unless someone took him there," Vance countered, her eyes narrowing. "Or he knew someone who worked there, or had a reason to be around that area." The investigation expanded quickly. Vance dispatched officers to interview Ethan Croft's surviving family, his elderly parents who now lived in a nursing home, heartbroken by their son's disappearance but still clinging to a sliver of hope. She also sent officers to track down his old friends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have seen him in the weeks leading up to his vanishing act. The task was arduous. Memories fade, people move, and allegiances shift over half a decade. Meanwhile, Dr. Thorne's team was making progress. They painstakingly reassembled more bone fragments, uncovering a clearer picture. "The faint striation on the sternum, Inspector," Thorne reported a few days later, "under high magnification appears to be consistent with a stab wound, a single, sharp instrument. It's difficult to be certain due to the bone's condition, but it's our strongest lead for cause of death so far. A stab wound. The case was definitively a homicide." Vance felt a surge of grim determination. "Ethan Croft's dental records. Get them to Dr. Thorne immediately. Let's see if we have a match." The waiting was agonizing. For the police, it was a race against time to identify the victim and then find their killer. For the town, it was a period of unsettling introspection. The grisly discovery had shattered Oakhaven's idyllic veneer, forcing residents to confront the uncomfortable truth that a murderer might have walked among them for years, unpunished and undetected. Old feuds, forgotten rivalries, and long-held suspicions began to resurface. The quiet streets, once safe and predictable, now seemed to hold a sinister echo of the past, a silent question hanging in the air. Who was Ethan Croft, and who wanted him dead? The answers, Vance knew, lay buried not just in the sewage pit, but in the forgotten corners of Oakhaven's collective memory. The identification of the remains as Ethan Croft sent a tremor through Oakhaven, confirming the town's darkest fears. The easygoing, sometimes reckless young man who had simply vanished was now unequivocally linked to a gruesome discovery, transforming a missing persons case into a full-blown murder investigation. Detective Inspector Vance felt the weight of expectation from the community, a palpable desire for answers and justice that had been denied for 5 long years. Ethan Croft's parents, an elderly couple worn thin by years of grief and uncertainty, were devastated yet found a strange kind of closure. "At least now we know," his mother sobbed, clutching a worn photograph of her son. "We can finally bury him properly." Their pain fueled Vance's resolve. With the victim identified, the investigation shifted into high gear, focusing on Ethan's life in the months leading up to his disappearance. Vance and Carter meticulously re-interviewed everyone from the original missing persons report and cast a wider net. The image of Ethan that emerged was complex. A loyal friend, a charmer, but also someone with a propensity for trouble and a talent for making enemies. He owed money to a few people, Detective Sergeant Carter reported, sifting through old police intelligence reports. Nothing huge, mostly small-time bookies and a couple of local toughs he'd borrowed from. But Ethan wasn't always good at paying back on time. Anyone specifically linked to him just before he disappeared? Vance asked, staring at a timeline meticulously constructed on the whiteboard, pinpointing Ethan's last known movements. There's Marcus Thorne, Carter began, flipping a page. No relation to our Dr. Thorne, thank God. Marcus was a local enforcer, worked for a low-level drug dealer called Snake Roberts. Ethan apparently bought some product on credit from Snake and owed a significant amount. Marcus was known for his persuasive methods of collection. Vance's pen scratched Marcus Thorne's name onto a list of potential suspects. Where is he now? Still in Oakhaven, runs a small auto body shop now. Went legitimate after Snake Roberts got busted a few years back, Carter replied. Clean record since, but definitely someone worth a visit. Another name that surfaced repeatedly was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had been Ethan's on-again, off-again girlfriend, a tumultuous relationship marked by passionate arguments and equally passionate reconciliations. The last time Ethan was seen arguing publicly, it was with Sarah, just a week before he vanished. They were fighting at the Rusty Mug, the usual, a former bartender recalled, nervously wiping down the counter. Something about him seeing another girl or maybe him owing money again. Sarah was furious, yelling about how he always messed things up. Vance added Sarah Jenkins to the list. A jilted lover, a heated argument. Motives were often simple, driven by raw emotion. The team also looked into Ethan's professional life, sparse as it was. He'd done some landscaping work for a wealthy resident, Arthur Pendleton, a reclusive but influential figure in Oakhaven. Pendleton was known for his meticulous gardens and his short temper. Ethan was fired from Pendleton's estate a month before he disappeared, Carter informed Vance. Pendleton claimed Ethan stole some expensive gardening tools. Ethan denied it vehemently, said Pendleton was just a tightwad trying to avoid paying him. Vance raised an eyebrow. Pendleton? The same Pendleton who used to be on the board of directors for the municipal works, back when the old sewage plant was decommissioned. Carter checked his notes. That's right, Inspector. He would have had access, or at least intimate knowledge of the plant's layout, including the disused pits. The connection sent a ripple of unease through Vance. Access to the disposal site was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Arthur Pendleton's name now sat prominently on the suspect list, a man of power and influence, but with a potential motive and, more importantly, access. The interviews began. Marcus Thorne, a hulking man with arms like tree trunks, was surprisingly calm when confronted. He admitted Ethan owed him money, but claimed he'd let it go after Ethan disappeared. He wasn't worth the trouble, officer. Thorne grunted, his eyes unreadable. Besides, I've got a business to run. Clean as a whistle these days. Vance noted the slight tremor in his hands, the way his gaze flickered away when she pressed him about Ethan's last movements. Sarah Jenkins, now a mother of two and working at the local diner, was initially defensive, then broke down in tears. She confirmed the argument but swore she had nothing to do with Ethan's disappearance. I loved him, Inspector, she sobbed. Even with all his faults. I was angry, yes, but I would never hurt him. Her alibi for the night Ethan disappeared was flimsy. She'd been home alone, distraught. Arthur Pendleton, stiff and proper, vehemently denied any involvement. The boy was a thief, Inspector, he declared, his voice cold and aristocratic. But I assure you, I am a man of principle. I do not resort to such brutish methods. He provided a detailed alibi, supported by his live-in housekeeper, a woman who seemed terrified of her employer but unwavering in her testimony. Vance couldn't shake the feeling that Pendleton was hiding something, his eyes betraying a flicker of something more than disdain for Ethan. As the interviews continued, Oak Haven simmered with tension. Everyone had a theory, every whispered conversation a new suspicion. The sewage pit had not only unearthed bones. It had unearthed the hidden resentments, the unspoken grievances, and the dark undercurrents that pulsed beneath the town's placid surface. Vance knew that one of these shadows held the killer, and she was determined to drag them into the light, no matter how deeply they had tried to bury their secret. The investigation into Ethan Croft's murder intensified, becoming a meticulous dance between forensic science and old-fashioned police work. Detective Inspector Vance, a woman driven by a keen sense of justice, found herself battling not just the complexities of a cold case, but also the escalating pressure from Oak Haven's rattled community. The town, once a picture of quiet charm, now felt like a pot simmering with suspicion and fear. Dr. Eris Thorne delivered a crucial piece of evidence that narrowed the scope significantly. "Inspector," he announced, gesturing to a magnified image on his lab monitor. "The stab wound on the sternum. We've managed to extract microscopic fragments of the weapon. It's metal, consistent with a knife blade, but there's also an unusual residue. Analysis indicates it's a specific type of steel alloy, commonly used in high-end, specialized tools, particularly gardening shears or pruners." Vance's mind immediately went to Arthur Pendleton. Gardening shears. The wealthy recluse who had fired Ethan, accusing him of theft, and who had intimate knowledge of the old sewage plant. The connection was chillingly direct. "Focus on Pendleton," Vance instructed Carter. "Revisit his property, search warrants, everything, and let's get a full background check on that housekeeper of his. Maria Rodriguez, wasn't it?" Meanwhile, the interviews with Ethan Croft's associates had yielded more conflicting information. One of Ethan's old friends, Leo, a small-time hustler, reluctantly admitted Ethan had bragged about getting something big just before he disappeared. He said he had leverage, Inspector, Leo stammered, avoiding eye contact. "Something he could use against someone powerful. Said it would make him rich." "Leverage against whom?" Vance pressed. Leo shrugged, genuinely appearing to not know. "He wouldn't say. Just hinted it was someone you wouldn't expect. Someone who had a lot to lose." This new information complicated things. Was Ethan's death simply about a debt or a jilted lover? Or was there a deeper, more sinister motive involving blackmail? The focus shifted heavily to Arthur Pendleton. Vance re-interviewed Maria Rodriguez, Pendleton's longtime housekeeper. This time, Vance came prepared. She noticed Maria's nervous fidgeting, the way her eyes darted towards the door whenever Pendleton's name was mentioned. "Ms. Rodriguez," Vance began softly, her voice calm but firm. "We know Mr. Pendleton has a very strict schedule. Can you account for his whereabouts on the night Ethan Croft disappeared, not just generally but specifically hour by hour?" Maria's composure cracked. Her voice, usually soft, became a whisper. He was in his study, Inspector. All night. I brought him tea. Did you see him the entire night?" Vance pressed, her gaze unwavering. "Did you hear anything unusual?" Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She wrung her hands. He went out for a while. Late. Said he needed to check on something in the garden. He was gone for a long time. When he came back, he looked different. Disturbed. Did you see what he was carrying?" Maria shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No. It was dark. But he was wearing his old work clothes, the ones he uses for the heavy gardening. And I heard him cleaning something in the shed later." This was the crack Vance needed. Maria Rodriguez's fear of Pendleton had kept her silent for 5 years, but the resurfacing of Ethan's bones and the police's relentless pursuit of justice had finally pushed her to confess what she knew. Armed with this new testimony and the forensic evidence pointing to specialized gardening tools, Vance secured a search warrant for Arthur Pendleton's sprawling estate. The search was extensive, focusing on the garden shed, the tool storage, and any secluded areas. The breakthrough came in the garden shed. Tucked away behind a stack of old potting soil bags, forensics officers discovered a pair of expensive, high-quality gardening shears. The blades, despite being thoroughly cleaned, showed faint traces of rust and, under microscopic analysis, minute flecks of blood and tissue, consistent with human remains. The shape of the blade also perfectly matched the linear striation found on Ethan Croft's sternum. Arthur Pendleton was arrested at his home, maintaining an air of indignant superiority even as the handcuffs were placed on his wrists. "This is an outrage. You have no proof," he spat, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "We have proof, Mr. Pendleton," Vance stated calmly, her voice chillingly quiet. "The shears, the blood, and the testimony of your housekeeper. Now, we just need to know why." Under intense questioning, Pendleton initially refused to speak, demanding his lawyer. But when confronted with the irrefutable evidence and Maria's heartbreaking testimony, his facade began to crumble. He finally confessed, his voice laced with a bitter resentment. Ethan Croft, it turned out, hadn't stolen tools. He had stumbled upon a far more damaging secret. While working on Pendleton's property, Ethan had inadvertently discovered a hidden cache of antique, illegally trafficked artifacts that Pendleton had been hoarding for years. Pendleton, a man obsessed with his pristine reputation and deeply involved in the illegal antiquities trade, had been terrified of exposure. Ethan, sensing an opportunity, had tried to blackmail him, demanding a large sum of money to keep quiet. "He was a greedy, insolent boy," Pendleton hissed, his eyes burning with rage. "He thought he could extort me. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. He threatened to go to the authorities." That night, Pendleton had lured Ethan to the old, disused sewage plant, ostensibly to give him the money. Instead, in a fit of cold fury, he had used his heavy-duty gardening shears, the very tools he used to meticulously prune his prize roses, to silence Ethan permanently. He had then, with his intimate knowledge of the plant's layout, managed to force Ethan's body into the deepest, most inaccessible settling pit, believing it would remain undiscovered forever. The confession was a stark, brutal truth that finally explained the grisly discovery. The threads, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, had finally woven together into a tapestry of greed, desperation, and murder. Oakhaven could finally begin to heal, knowing that the ghost in the sewage pit had found justice, and the truth, no matter how ugly, had finally resurfaced. The arrest and subsequent confession of Arthur Pendleton brought a sense of grim satisfaction to Oakhaven, but also a lingering melancholy. The town, while relieved to have answers, was forced to confront the dark underbelly that had been exposed. The trial of Arthur Pendleton was swift, his confession and the overwhelming forensic evidence leaving little room for doubt. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, his pristine reputation shattered, his life of privilege ending in disgrace behind bars. For Ethan Croft's parents, the verdict offered a final, painful closure. They were finally able to hold a proper funeral for their son, burying his reassembled remains with dignity. The small ceremony was attended by a handful of Ethan's old friends and several members of the Oakhaven police force, including Inspector Vance, who watched as the coffin was lowered, a silent promise of justice fulfilled. The raw grief, compounded by years of not knowing, was slowly beginning to give way to a quiet sorrow and the first tentative steps towards healing. The Oakhaven sewage plant, the site of the grim discovery, underwent a complete transformation. The demolition of the old, defunct sections was completed, and a state-of-the-art facility was constructed in its place. The specific pit where Ethan's remains were found was ceremonially sealed and consecrated. A quiet memorial plaque placed nearby, bearing Ethan Croft's name and the simple inscription, "May he rest in peace, and may the truth always surface." The gruesome discovery had ironically served as a catalyst for much-needed modernization, erasing the physical scars of neglect while acknowledging the historical wound. Detective Inspector Eleanor Vance, while professionally satisfied, carried the weight of the case with her. She often reflected on the resilience of the human spirit, the determination of her team, and the profound impact a single life, even one lived on the fringes, could have. The case had reminded her that every missing person was a story untold, every set of bones a life extinguished too soon, and every hidden secret a potential for future suffering. She became a more vocal advocate for cold case units and for revisiting unsolved disappearances, knowing all too well that the truth could lie buried for years, waiting for the right moment or the right person to unearth it. Dr. Eris Thorne, the meticulous forensic anthropologist, continued his vital work, but the Oakhaven case solidified his belief in the power of forensic science to speak for the dead. He often used the case as an example in lectures, detailing how even in the most degraded conditions, bones could yield incredible secrets, pointing towards a narrative of events that human witnesses often failed to provide. The fragments of bone, the subtle striations, the residue of a blade each piece, had contributed to the reconstruction of a crime that had been meticulously concealed. The legacy of the Grisly discovery lingered in Oakhaven. It became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that even in the quietest of towns, darkness could fester beneath a placid surface. The town council implemented stricter regulations regarding abandoned or disused municipal properties, ensuring that such potential hiding places would never again go unchecked. The local newspaper, which had followed the story from the initial discovery to the final conviction, published a series of articles on the importance of community vigilance and supporting law enforcement. For some, the story was a source of morbid fascination, a topic of hushed conversation in local cafes. For others, it was a painful lesson in the fragility of life and the insidious nature of hidden secrets. But for everyone in Oakhaven, the discovery of bones in the sewage pit had forever changed their perception of their peaceful town. It had awakened them to the reality that justice, though sometimes delayed, would always find a way to resurface, breaking through layers of time and neglect to bring light to the darkest corners. The echoes of Ethan Croft's life and his tragic death continued to resonate. His story was a testament to the fact that no life truly disappears without a trace, and that the past, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to make its presence known. The sewage pit, once a symbol of forgotten waste, had become a monument to a life reclaimed and a grim reminder of the enduring power of truth. And as the sun set over Oakhaven, casting long shadows across the newly revitalized treatment plant, the town knew that while some wounds heal, the lessons learned from the Grisly discovery would forever remain etched in its collective memory.